Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was January 15th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. The Spanish government financed a major digitization effort of archives from throughout Spanish history, and the archive of the Crown of Aragon is just so amazingly abundant in its hundreds, actually thousands and thousands of pages from as early as the 12th century, but in major abundance in the 14th century. So we've got so many to choose from that we can do very easily, one from every day. Let's begin today's document. Well, I am so excited about today's document because finally I'm getting away from the weird, hard to comprehend little authorizations of sales in towns or like petitions or any of this kind of like political stuff, and I'm getting into something about the arts. And this is something that drew me to Joan and Violante, really kind of kept my interest going, which is that they have been celebrated in music history for their patronage of a lot of the innovative music that was being produced at this time. And so one of the wonderful things about researching their reign is that I've been able to learn about some of the very weird music that was being produced. It was like very cutting edge. It's like the kind of stuff that is in our time considered experimental music. And in fact, I read one music historian who said that the innovations that were happening in the late 14th century in France and then also in the Crown of Aragon, those innovations in terms of how creative and like out of the box thinking they were in music, those types of experiments were not really taken on again until the 20th century. And so there's this level of creativity that's happening with music at this time. Joan and Violante are all about it. They're constantly trying to get the most famous, but also just any troubadours to come over to perform, and Joan is really interested in how music works, and he collects musical instruments, which is what today's document is about. I just want to mention two musical styles that if you're interested in the innovation that I'm talking about, you can read more about them. One is called Ars Nova, the new art. It's really a term that captures the innovation brought about with polyphonic music, and the composer who is really the exemplar of this is named Guillaume Machaut. Guillaume Machaut has just a tremendous amount of scholarship about him in music history, and my knowledge of music and music history is still at the beginning level, so I I can't really do a really decent job of explaining exactly what about his music is so special, and I'll add some sources in the bibliography for today's episode so that you can get into that. But Guillaume Machaut was very famous in his day in the late 14th century, and it's very likely that when Violante was a child, she saw Guillaume Machaut perform. By the time of the start of their reign, Guillaume Machaut is no longer alive. But there's a lot of imitators, and also there's a lot of books of his musical composition and poetry that get created during their reign. And we have a lot of documentation of Violante, like letters being sent to France to contacts like the Duc de Berry, requesting copies of the latest release or the latest manuscript production of Guillaume Machaut's work. So Guillaume Machaut was a composer in the Ars Nova style. The second term that I want to share with you so you can take next steps in your own research if you're curious about this is the term ars subtilior. Now, ars subtilior is the one that's like really highly experimental. It's also very much polyphonic, and when you listen to some ars subtilior, it's really like weird. It's, I think, an acquired taste, but it is very strange. And so it really wasn't the kind of music that people would like have parties to at the time. It was more of like a music theoreticians kind of thing. And Joan was all about it. He loved it. There was also like a kind of interesting connection between the written word and music with ars subtilior, where the composer would do some kind of crossovers between written word or like letters in the name of, say, their patron, and then weave that into the way the music was constructed. So it's all just very wild, and in order to really understand it, you have to know a lot about music and music theory. And so again, I am really just not as able to explain it in better detail, but it sounds cool. And the stuff that I love is reading about how Joan and Violante really just were recruiting troubadours from all over the place and just having them as a constant presence in their lives. In fact, I found out from Benjamin Gamble in his book on a completely different subject that at times Joan would attend up to 4 concerts per day. So these folks were like really into music and artistic patronage. They were into literature too, of course. We'll definitely see all kinds of literary pursuits from them. But today's document is the first one in a long series that were transcribed and identified in a wonderful publication, a document collection by the music historians Josep Trencs y Odena and Ignasi Bages y Hardy. They put together a wonderful collection. It's got to have something like 400 documents from the time of Joan and Violante's reign, all related to music. So either particular troubadours or the purchase of musical instruments, or just anything having to do with music. The document that we looked at in the beginning of the podcast, episode 5, was actually on the same page as one of the documents in this document collection by Tranks y Odena and by ACRD. So I have another one waiting from Violante and her treasurer, but today's is from Joan and his treasurer. His treasurer is listed here as Ramon de Soler, a name that we keep hearing again and again because I think he's the go-to money man for Joan. And in today's document, it's in Latin, but Tranks y Odena and by ACRD, they transcribed it fully. So I know what every letter is and all the expanded abbreviations. It's such a relief. I can't even tell you. After just like banging my head against the wall with a bunch of Latin documents thus far, to have one that's just already transcribed. Oh, hooray. So it's very clear that what's happening here is that there is a harp maker, a maker, an artisan, a maker of musical instruments. His name is Petro Palau. And Joan has commissioned Petro Palau to make 2 musical instruments for him, 2 harps. So special kinds of harps have been constructed for Joan, and in this document he's instructing his treasurer Ramon de Soler to release the funds to pay Petro Palau. In fact, in a different register, on the next day, Joan has a document that says that he has, and this is kind of a hard phrase to figure out exactly what it's describing. It says that he has recognized the receipt of the money from the treasury. This is interesting. First of all, because it gets into the different register types, and sometimes you see a letter and you're like, why is this not in the secret seal register? And then other times you see one in the secret seal register and you're like, why did this have to be so secret? It doesn't seem to merit any secrecy at all. So basically, in the archive of the Crown of Aragon, you've got all these different categories. And a lot of it had to do with when the author of the document instructed the chancery staff to put a type of seal on it, or was like, you know what, this just doesn't need to be sealed. There's nothing sensitive in here. So if the sender of the letter said this has to be of the utmost secrecy, put like a really secure seal, wax seal on this letter, then it would be recorded in the register for the secret seal. This letter in today's document is an example of that. In the second to the last line, it has the phrase sub nostro sigillo secreto, the secret seal. If the document was not sensitive, and honestly I can't figure out exactly what's so sensitive about this, he's just authorizing the release of funds for payment to a certain person. But anyway, if it was not as secret or private, then it would go out in another type of register. It would get recorded in one of the other books. So the document that we see on January 16th from Joan is communicating that Joan has received the coins, I think. The amount of payment here is 100 Aragonese florins. And so I think that Joan notes in the other register, not in the secret seal, but just in the secret register, that he's gotten the coins, and now the coins are going to go to Petro Palau. the way that this is all happening is very confusing to me. Like, why would Joan need to interact with this again after this initial letter that we're looking at today is saying, pay this person for the harps that they made? Why do we have to have something again the next day from Joan saying that he recognizes the receipt? Maybe he's noting down that there's been the next stage in the payment process. It's confusing to me. But oh well. I think Petro Palau is just really insured of getting his payment because it's in two different places in the documentation now. By the way, secret, like secreto, that word to us means, ooh, you're hiding something, you have a secret. But actually, in medieval usage, that could just mean private. So it's not necessarily that you're like hiding something. It's just that it's your private business and it's not like a public act. But at the same time, I see this secreto and sigillo secreto on all kinds of stuff anyway. It's just like all the time. So I'm not even sure that that has like this actual higher level of meaning, or if it just became like the standard level. I'm still trying to figure that out. That's one of the projects that I have for this year, is to get a better sense of why certain documents wound up in some registers and others wound up in other registers. Like there's a register called diversorum. Like, is that just like miscellaneous? But there's so many different categories of registers. Why do you even need a miscellaneous? It's all just very confusing. And who is to blame for that? Do you remember? Père the Ceremonious. Père the Ceremonious reorganized the chancery about 30 years before. And he created all these categories, and then the chancery staff just like were complaining about how they had no idea what letter to put where anymore because there were so many different categories. Okay, before we wrap up today's episode, I just wanted to come back to the amount of money mentioned here for the harp maker Petro Palau. The amount of money being paid out to Petro Palau is 100 florins. That is about 1,100 solides. 1,100 solides is about 3 times the amount of money that Violante paid to her bread maker, which we talked about in episode 5, for his services for a 3-month period. So it kind of gives you the scale of how much these harps cost. They actually costed 3 times as much for what you would pay a baker who's working for you for a period of 3 months. So these are expensive instruments. As fine musical instruments should be expensive. There's real craftsmanship there. Not to diminish the craftsmanship of amazing bakers. Okay, we have made it to the end of this episode. I am feeling bad that I have somehow implied that artisan instrument makers should be paid more than talented bakers. I want to go on the record and say that I do not believe that is the case. I believe that highly skilled bakers should be paid just as much as highly skilled music instrument makers. These are artisan skills. All right. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt cara companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website jonathanseyfried.net to see an image of today's document and additional show notes and some really good bibliographic citations for the history of music at this time, and one article in particular by Maria del Carmen Gomez Mutané is amazing for an explanation of Joan's role in the spread of this music from France into Iberia. So check that out. It's a really good article. And listen again tomorrow to hear more about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.